Good evening. Welcome back to another Classic Comics live stream where I'll go over some of the headlines of the past week as far as genre entertainment goes. Not really a whole lot this week, so this is probably going to be kind of a shorter stream, but there are some interesting things to go over. First, I'll ask those who watch this, both live and who watch on a rerun, if you would please like this stream and also please sub to the channel. Maybe check out some of my other videos. Okay, so first thing this week is probably got to be the whole Games Workshop story involving Warhammer. So let me bring that up here and we'll just start there. This is from Bounding into Comics. So, Games Workshop makes insulting retcon to Warhammer 40k lore, claims all-male Adeptus cadre faction has always featured female members. So, in a development that can only be described as massively insulting to the intelligence of their player base, Warhammer 40k developer Games Workshop has taken to claiming that despite years of official canonical evidence to the contrary, the game's all-male Adeptus Custodes faction has always included female members among its ranks. This retcon to the franchise's long-standing lore was first revealed to the public on April 13th, courtesy of YouTuber Ash Barker's preview of the upcoming 10th edition of the Warhammer 40k guidebook, Codex Adeptus Custodes. Therein, eagle-eye viewers noticed that in the book's introduction of the actual Adeptus Custodes and their lore, Games Workshop had specifically chosen to highlight a battlefield story concerning a female custodian by the name of Calades Turoval. Calades Turovalia Kesh. Custodian Calades Turovalia Kesh stood upon the bridge of a Cobra-class destroyer. Begins a paragraph within a section subheadlined The Solar Fastness. Named Vigilant Flame, the warship belonged to the mighty Battlefleet Solar. She lingered in the shadows at the back of the bridge, positioned at a spot where she could observe the actions of every crew member, be they in the instrumentation pits, at the armament shrines, or in the case of Shipmaster Lethwick, stood ramrod straight before his command throne. As noted above, prior to the publication of the Codex Adeptus Custodes, the concept of a female custodian did not exist. A legion of 10,000 elite genetically modified warriors who serve as the personal guard to the ruler of the Imperium of Man, the God Emperor of mankind, as explained in their initial introduction in 2017's Codex Space Marines 8th edition. All members of the Adeptus Custodes, quote, begin their lives as the infant sons of the noble houses of Terra, unquote. The Adeptus Custodes are introduced in Warhammer 40k Codex Space Marines 8th edition. Okay. Elaborating on this brief bit of lore 3 years later in the guidebook's 9th edition printing, Games Workshop additionally detailed potential custodians are taken in at a very young age to better survive, no older than late infancy, and it is a great honor for those of Terra noble houses to submit a son. Further, when asked point blank by a fan in 2019 whether Custodes can be female, longtime series lore contributor Aaron Dimsky-Bowden, even despite his own openness to the idea, admitted that the God Emperor's elite had canonically always been presented as male. At the time of quote, at the time of working on the lore, there was no reason they couldn't be male or female. And as far as these things stand, there's still no lore reason they can't be, unquote. Explained the Horus Heresy novelist in a comment posted to the R40k lore subreddit. Quote, but there is a non-lore region, which was the previous IP overlord. Dimsky-Bone did not specify the respective entity or individual, saying, there are no female custodian models. They're all male, so don't write any female ones, unquote. Quote, there was also a studio mandate a couple of years after that saying, don't do female custodians, unquote. He continued. Quote, again, that seemed to tie in with the release of an all male mini line, two very rare moments of direction from on high, unquote. Quote, I don't want to argue about what may or may not mean, since although I'm ambivalent to the notion of female space marines, really they'd make such little difference at the end result. I couldn't care less what gender they start out as. Several creators actively thought female custodians would have been cool, and there was no lore against it, unquote. Dembski Bowden concluded. Quote, hell, we were in the position to make lore for it, but long story short, no, the answer seems to be there aren't any, though the reasons aren't in universe yet, unquote. Following the revelation that the Codex Adeptus Custodes would be running aground of the franchise's established lore, in response to an April 13th post made to the official Warhammer Twitter account announcing that the guidebook was now available for pre-order, site user at LDK721252 indirectly inquired with Games Workshop, quote, why did you make female Custodes, unquote. In turn, blatantly lying to the fan's face, the account shot back, quote, since the first of the 10,000 were created, there have always been female custodians, unquote. As of this writing, the Codex Adeptus Custodes is set to officially stomp all over the series lore on April 27th. Yeah, there have always been female Custodes, and the Force has always been female, you see. And we've always been at war with East Asia. So, I mean, it it is what it is. Now, I haven't played Warhammer 40K myself, so I don't have a real emotional investment in it. I have played the original tabletop Warhammer role playing game, the fantasy game, which was kind of a D&D knockoff. It was kind of supposed to be more, I guess, kind of grim and gritty or something like that. And I played a little of that around like late 80s, early 90s, just a bit, and I liked it. But I've never played Warhammer 40K, and so I don't know a great deal about it. I do remember playing a Space Marines video game several years ago, a little bit, and it was fine. But yeah, it's not like I have a real dog in this myself. It doesn't surprise me that this has happened. Any IP that is significant and has a significant audience, this is going to happen. It's just going to happen. In a way, it is kind of amusing because as one IP after another has basically just kind of gone into the ditch as this sort of wokeness, and wokeness meaning basically a mix of feminism and critical race theory, basically Marxism under another name, as it has been taken over by these things one after another IP, whether it's Star Wars or Star Trek or what have you. You could look at the comments on various YouTube videos and see people who are 40K fans basically saying, I'm glad this hasn't happened to 40K. And I mean, that's never going to happen to 40K. That's never going to go woke. Well, now it has. So, it's unfortunate, but not surprising. It just is what it is, and similar things happen with Dungeons and Dragons. That has too. I can only speculate on why. Again, there's the argument that uh, this whole DEI sort of arrangement and this sort of inclusion and stuff in the lore, it's helps them raise their ESG scores and get money from various, I think, powerful index funds like BlackRock and maybe Vanguard as well. I don't know how much of that is true and how much of it isn't. Some people claim that's not the case. I don't know. It certainly seems that way from some of the things they've said, but yeah. So wokeness claims another IP. Kind of a bummer. Okay, let's move on here. Okay, so the next one, this is a Marvel related story, and this comes from looper.com. Captain America 4, Harrison Ford's Red Hulk, look leaked by McDonald's. Captain America Brave New World puts Sam Wilson, now embracing the Captain America mantle passed on to him by his friend Steve Rogers, up against villains new and familiar alike, and facing down enemies he's never faced before, like the leader. Tim Blake Nelson joined the list of other MCU actors who've made surprise comebacks. He'll also clash with one of his longtime adversaries, Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross, played by Harrison Ford. Ford has been at odds with Wilson and the Avengers for years, acting as a bureaucratic threat rather than a physical one. However, that might be changing in a big way. Yeah, here's the particular image, and I'll go back to that in a second here. In a post by at Cosmic M Media on X, the platform formerly known as Twitter, McDonald's toys for Brave New World show off new looks for several characters from the film. Alongside the new Falcon, played by Danny Ramirez, Diamondback, and the controversial Sabra, Shira Haas, who Marvel has changed for the movie, Ross is present in a new form. At long last, it seems the antagonist who debuted in the MCU way back in 2008's The Incredible Hulk will finally become Red Hulk. Okay, that's not well written because they say the antagonist. Oh, okay, I see what they mean. They're talking about introduced in the movies. Okay, I thought they mean in the comics for a second. All right. So granted, the McDonald's Kids Toys meals are highly stylized, so it remains to be seen what exactly Ford could look like as Ross's monstrous alter ego. Even though this leak all but confirms that Ross will become Red Hulk in Brave New World, Ford hasn't been forthcoming about sharing if such a transformation will take place. And here's the image in particular. I guess this shows some toys that you can get in Happy Meals, and this appears to be, this isn't in English. I guess this is maybe Spanish. And we see toys, and again, we've got a couple of different images of Captain America, one with wings, one without, a shield. And then we get the sort of surprises. We've got a Red Hulk, this character with the magenta hair here, which is Diamondback, I'm pretty sure, because she had hair like that in the comics. The new Falcon, who is this Hispanic guy, who I guess is going to be Falcon's sidekick. And then Ruth, whoever Ruth is. I'm guessing that's going to be Sabra. And why they're changing it and just calling her Ruth, I don't know. I would guess that they're doing it because in the comics, Sabra is a Jewish and Israeli hero. She's like Israel's Captain America, basically. She's like the national hero of Israel. And obviously, with what's going on in the Middle East, particularly in the last year or two, uh, Israel isn't too popular, particularly in left wing circles. And so they decided to try and, I guess, probably sort of distance her from Israel as much as they can. It'll be interesting to see how they present her in the movie. And Diamondback is in it, I guess, because I think it originally or at one point this movie was going to involve the Serpent Society, who are a group of villains who all have basically a kind of snake or reptilian motif to them. And in the comics, Diamondback actually kind of became a sort of love interest to Captain America. That was Steve Rogers, though, of course, not Sam Wilson. And she kind of turned good, basically, or at least for a while. It's like they're packing a lot into this movie because apparently Hydra is going to be back or something like that. So a lot of this is going to revolve around Hydra. And then you've got the Red Hulk, that angle to it. And then I don't know how Diamondback is going to fit into, or Ruth are going to fit into the plot exactly, but you got to work them in. And then, of course, Sam Wilson's getting a sidekick, so you got to include that. And then on top of that, they're supposed to, I guess this is going to involve him forming the new Avengers in part. I mean, there's a lot that's going to be going on in this movie. And I think I talked about this, and it may have been the last live stream I did, but previous ones, where apparently this Captain America movie is a mess, a real mess, because they had basically made the movie back like late last year or sometime last year, before it was pretty much done before the strike. And then not long after the strike, they showed it to test audiences or somewhere around that point, and it didn't test well. So they basically decided to just kind of remake the frickin' thing. And apparently that's not going well. So I don't know. And apparently this movie's costing him a fortune. Okay. Where are we? Okay. Oh, yeah, and that's another thing, because apparently Ford has been queried about Red Hulk and whether he was going to be Red Hulk or not. And I remember seeing some article about that somewhere. And Ford, when he was asked, he was basically like, What's the Red Hulk? What is that?" He claimed to not even know what that was. Okay, so it was only a matter of time before Thunderbolt Ross found a way to become Red Hulk. He has battled heroes through the military. Oh yeah, and that's another thing, is the leader is going to be in it. He's going to be one of the villains too, and I'm guessing the leader is going to be how Ross becomes the Hulk. The leader will help him do it, because the leader, of course, helped Emil Blonsky, become the Abomination way back in the Hulk movie, right? He has battled heroes through the military and brought the fight to them in boardrooms, but he himself has never had the strength to physically match them on his own. If this Captain America Brave New World leak is to be believed, then it seems Captain America will be the first of Ross's heroic adversaries to feel the wrath of the Red Hulk. Unfortunately, Harrison Ford hasn't been eager to discuss Ross's transformation ahead of the Hulk's release, or the film's release. Yeah, I doubt he cares. I mean, let's face it, Ford is doing this strictly for the money. He does not care. I mean, he didn't even like doing Star Wars. He didn't even like having to like share the screen with a Wookiee or an Ewok. So I'm pretty sure he isn't really excited about the prospect of being turned into a big red monster. But, money talks. As the wait for Brave New World continues, Ford has spoken sporadically about the feature and his role within it. For instance, during the press tour for the box office bomb Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, he was asked if moviegoers could expect him to become Red Hulk on the silver screen. Seemingly bewildered by the question, Ford replied, "What is the Red Hulk?" He added that Ross becoming a Hulk may or may not happen in the movie, offering no further details. Time will tell if, once the Brave New World press tour kicks off, he'll be more willing to speak on the matter. So, it's going to be interesting, because I believe in the movie they say that he's become president. Ross has become president. So, I mean, what are they going to do? Fight the president? It's I don't. It's going to be interesting to see how they make that work, or fail to make it work. It sounds like this movie is going to be a mess to me, so I don't have high hopes for it. But who knows? Okay. Now, speaking of Marvel Studios, I'll move on to the next story here. And this is from the Hollywood Reporter. Marvel lays off 15 employees. Layoffs are occurring Monday at Marvel Entertainment in New York and Marvel Studios in Burbank. Around 15 people will be affected, including junior level employees in production and development, the Hollywood Reporter has confirmed. No further layoffs are anticipated beyond Monday. The layoffs come as Marvel refocuses its slate after a content boom, as it ramped up to produce numerous films and TV shows a year to feed Disney Plus. As part of the pullback, the studio just has one film opening this year, July's Deadpool and Wolverine, and is expected to have just 2 live action TV shows this year. One of which was Echo, which has already come and flopped. Disney CEO Bob Iger telegraphed in recent months that he expected Disney as a whole to lower its output and refocus on quality projects after several misses at the box office. We've reduced output, particularly at Marvel. When you fix or when you address these issues with in movies, you do three things, Iger said during an earnings call in February. Quote, you get aggressive at making sure the films you're making can be even better. Sometimes you kill projects you don't believe in. And of course, you put new things in the pipeline that you do believe in, that you have much more confidence in. And we're doing all of that. The movies come after the busiest time in Marvel's history, an era that saw diminishing returns on some of its projects. It's 2021, or in 2021, it released 4 films and 5 TV shows. In 2022, it put out 3 films and 3 TV shows, plus a few specials. The pullback was already felt in 2023 with just 3 films and 3 TV shows. The layoffs were also partially due to efficiencies created by Disney, or when Disney folded the consumer products focused Marvel Entertainment into Disney's larger business units. That move included parting ways last year with longtime chairman Ike Perlmutter. So, as they say in here, I think a lot of this is simply because they're cutting down on their content. They're going to make less content. So, it stands to reason that they would have fewer employees and therefore they could afford to fire people. And I'm sure some will say, like this is the beginning of the end and all that. I mean, obviously, it's not a good sign. I think all of us, if you'd come to us back in say 2020 and said, do you think in 3 or 4 years Marvel's going to be firing people? Most of us would say no. The future looked bright and uh, there didn't seem to be any real expectation that Marvel was going to decline, but that is what happened. And so, under the circumstances, I think this is understandable. And I don't think it really means a whole lot beyond just what the article says, that they're cutting back on content and they just don't need as many people. Now, if they continue to put out flops, which they might, and they continue to put out streaming shows that fail, which they might, then yeah, maybe it could get worse for them. But for now, I don't think this in and of itself really means a whole lot. I don't think this is kind of the same signal of the studio being basically in a state of disaster the way it would with, say, Paramount or some other studios around Hollywood. Now, speaking of Paramount, and that brings us to my next story here. And this is from Deadline, I believe. Come on. There we go. From Deadline, Sony in talks to team with Apollo in bid for Paramount Global. Remember those rumors, about 8 years ago, about how Sony was a target for acquisition? No more. Still, don't say merger yet. Deadline has confirmed that Sony Pictures Entertainment CEO Tony, I hope I say this right, Vinciquerra, I'm not sure, has been in talks with Apollo Global Management about making a go for Paramount. This despite Skydance Redbird Capital being in exclusive talks with Paramount Global's majority shareholder, National Amusements, to take control of the studio. The Apollo and Sony plan reportedly is an all cash one for outstanding stock in Paramount, in total making the studio private through a joint venture, per the New York Times in a story today. It's not clear how Sony would be involved or if it's merely in management expertise. Our understanding at this point is that Apollo is doing a lot of the heavy lifting, which I guess means putting up most of the money. Paramount's beaten down stock jumped 12% in after hours trading today as investors processed the scenario. There recently has been more enthusiasm for the Apollo bid, which at one point was reported as a $26 billion take private offer than that of David Ellison's Skydance. That preference has been expressed despite the fact that Skydance and its backers are in exclusive deal talks with National Amusements, Paramount's controlling shareholder. Sony's involvement would add another wrinkle, especially for the traditional film and TV sectors, as two Hollywood majors would potentially be able to combine operations. Fonseca also brought to his current role a significant background in television, having held exec posts at both Fox and CBS. While there's a disdain among some in Hollywood about private equity getting their hands onto a conglomerate and breaking it up, a Sony Apollo partnership is a different scenario. There's plenty for the Culver City lot to dream about here. Long billed in the streaming era as an arms dealer in content, as it avoided the multi-billion-dollar startup costs of an OTT service, Sony and Paramount Plus would have direct access to one. The former streaming pay one window is currently with Netflix. On top of that, there's a grand dynasty marriage in combining both studios' feature and TV IP, not to mention Sony gets to scale up in a big way. Whether those scenarios occur remain to be seen, as it's still early and Skydance remains in pole position. So yes, so when these different studios that have really significant IP combine, of course, you start thinking about possible crossovers, right? Like supposedly somewhere down the line, Marvel, since they got 20th Century Fox, are already talking about or considering doing some kind of crossovers between Marvel characters and Aliens and Marvel and Predator, which, let's face it, at first glance, that sounds pretty cool, right? And I know when there was talk of Warner Brothers possibly acquiring Paramount, I was already thinking along the lines of, well, what if we had a Star Trek Babylon 5 crossover, for example, since they would own both those IPs, or maybe a Star Trek, they own Warner Brothers, and so maybe they could do some kind of Star Trek DC crossover, like Star Trek and Green Lantern, which has happened in the comics. Or what I think would be maybe more appropriate would be Star Trek and Legion of Superheroes, which I think could be really cool. But with Sony and their IPs, I don't know. It just offhand, because the first one I think of is Spider-Man. And it seems like Star Trek Spider-Man, there isn't a real obvious pairing there, it seems to me. But there are other IPs. I can't think of them right now. Part of the problem is after Star Trek, they don't have a whole lot. I guess there's Mission Impossible. And I guess they would have Top Gun, right? But I don't know how much life Top Gun has without Tom Cruise, though. And I don't know. I just don't think that at Tom Cruise's age, I just don't think that has a big future. I mean, they got Beavis and Butthead, and I think they got SpongeBob, right? And that's kind of it. There's not a whole lot. But maybe I'm overlooking something, and there is some kind of cool crossover between their IPs that they could do. All right, and speaking of Spider-Man, that leads me right into my next story. I'm doing a good job of segueing tonight. It seems like every time I bring up something, it leads right into the next story. So this is from geektyrant.com. Sam Raimi and Jon Favreau reportedly possible directors of Spider-Man No Way Home sequel. Marvel and Sony are currently on the hunt for a director to take on the sequel to Spider-Man No Way Home. Two of the most recent directors mentioned were Justin Lin and Drew Goddard, but now there are other possibilities that have been named to take on the gig. According to World of Real, Sam Raimi is in the running to direct the next Spider-Man movie, and they also say that John Francis Daley and Jonathan Goldstein of Game Night and Dungeons and Dragons and Jon Favreau of Iron Man and Mandalorian may be possibilities. It was previously rumored that Raimi is for the Avengers: The Kang Dynasty and Avengers: Secret Wars movies for Marvel. Maybe he would do all three, though. I doubt that. As for Favreau, I seriously doubt he would end up doing. He's currently playing in the Star Wars sandbox with The Mandalorian, and he's currently developing the Mandalorian and Grogu movie for Lucasfilm, along with whatever comes after that. Then there's John Francis Daley and Jonathan Goldstein, whichever, which would be great. The two worked on the script for Spider-Man Homecoming, so they are super familiar with that corner of the Marvel Universe. Sony and Marvel have yet to make an official announcement regarding Spider-Man 4, but the project is in development. Tom Holland and Zendaya will return to their roles of Peter Parker and MJ respectively, and the film is expected to start filming later this year in either September or October. So Zendaya is going to be in it, though, even though she doesn't remember Peter anymore. Because, I mean, kind of the impression I had at the last film is that that was sort of the end of that chapter of his life, and he was moving on. And, and because he comes to her and then decides not to tell her anything and just walks away, and like better to leave them to live their life than to, I tell her everything that happened. First of all, it would sound crazy, and then burden her with all that. It seemed like he was maybe moving into a new chapter of his life, and he would have a new surrounding cast without Zendaya. But I don't know. I mean, she's a big deal. People, I don't know about people, but the media likes her. Anyway, Hollywood and the media like her. And I guess there are some people who do. But I would prefer that he move on myself. But, who knows? She actually wasn't bad in the last one. I didn't really think much of her character in the previous two movies, but oh well. And, I would prefer they introduce a new love interest for him and maybe give him a new uh, surrounding cast. Instead of MJ, maybe give him Gwen Stacy as a love interest. Instead of Ned, maybe give him Harry Osborn as a friend, or maybe some other characters. And as far as directing it, I don't think Raimi would do the Avengers and do that as well. I think, looking at the names they mentioned, I would bet you that what his name, Daly and Goldstein or whatever, they seem like most likely to do it. It would seem, because they're not committed to something else already. Okay, so let's move on to some DC stuff here. And let me talk a little about Zack Snyder, because that guy just seems to be inescapable. And this is from the Hollywood Reporter. Leonardo DiCaprio had, quote, a lot of great ideas for Lex Luthor in Batman versus Superman. Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice's Lex Luthor could have looked very different. Director Zack Snyder stopped by the Happy, Sad, Confused podcast to promote the upcoming second part of his Rebel Moon films for Netflix, which I haven't seen, but everything I'm hearing is that thing is just sucks, that it's not good. Over the course of the conversation, host John Horowitz asked him if there was any truth to the fact that the studio wanted Tom Hanks or Adam Driver for the villain role. Quote, I think I did talk to Adam on the phone. Yeah, he said of the rumored castings. Leonardo DiCaprio, I talked to him about it also. While Snyder ultimately went with Jesse Eisenberg as Lex, starring opposite Henry Cavill's Superman and Ben Affleck's Batman, he revealed the Titanic star, quote, had a lot of great ideas actually just in the meeting, unquote. I think in the end he was like, I don't know. But he was really smart about the material and really smart about the character, the director shared. In a lot of ways, I think he was the one that mentioned to me this idea about Superman fighting the Justice League at some point. Snyder explored DiCaprio's idea that Superman could fight his allies in both his 2017 film Justice League as well in 2021's Zack Snyder's Justice League, which was the filmmaker's extended version that came in at 4 hours and 2 minutes. Batman v Superman wasn't the first time the killers of the Flower Moon Star was in the conversation to place someone in a superhero film. David S. Goyer, who co-wrote Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy, previously told Horowitz that DiCaprio was also in talks to play a part in those films. The screenwriter recalled in 2023, I remember after The Dark Knight, the head of Warner Brothers at the premiere said, you got to do the Riddler, Leo as the Riddler, saying to me, you got to tell Chris Leo is the Riddler. Eh, I don't know about that. And honestly, I don't know about him as well. I guess he could work as Luthor. DiCaprio kind of has a big head, doesn't he? Kind of a big round head. And as I remember, I believe part of the reason why Eisenberg wound up playing Luthor was because I think originally he had actually been hired to play the Riddler at one point. I think they were planning to have him play the Riddler. And then at some point they pivoted and decided he wasn't going to play the Riddler. And they were, I guess, I don't know, maybe they were like, well, we've already got him here under contract. Let's just have him play Luthor, maybe. I don't know. I initially I thought that him playing Luthor was, I mean, it wouldn't have been my choice, but I thought, okay, Luthor is this kind of Silicon Valley tech mogul, this sort of Zuckerberg type. Okay, that's interesting. I can go with it, but I don't know. It just didn't quite work, and I think part of the reason was because he just played Luthor as so weird, and it just felt to me like because a big part of the movie is that Luthor is able to sort of manipulate people and get them to do what he wants them to do, but he comes off as so weird and so awkward. It's like, how does that work? He doesn't seem like that persuasive a person. Okay. And speaking of DC properties, let me move on to the next thing here. So there is some interesting news regarding Superman that came out this week. This is from Bleeding Cool. Mark Miller to publish public domain Superman comics. Okay, so in 2022, to publicize his new comic book series, The Ambassadors, Mark Miller tweeted, it might take me a year or two to get ahead on my schedule, but I'm 100% going to do another Superman story at some point. I've had a notebook I've been noodling in for quite a while now. Following it up, saying, the nice people who run DC contacted me last night about this tweet, and we're definitely going to do this once everybody's schedule aligns a year or two down the line. Gonna be big. Then earlier this year, to publicize his big game series and his podcast, Miller Time, he told Jeff Johns regarding Netflix, quote, I'm under contract, so I have to do a certain amount of stuff, but I'm definitely going to get a little carve out at the end of next year. And I've talked with the DC guys. I'm going to do like a 6-issue thing and wanted to get somebody great to draw it, like Olivier Coipel. I'm not sure I'm saying it right. I think it's Olivier Coipel or Pepe Larraz. Then late last year, he appeared to be negotiating with DC in public, saying, quote, my suggestion is that if one of these companies swaps that 2% royalty for a 50-50 split with the creative team on all sales over, say, 60,000 copies, they will send a bolt of electricity through the industry and bring in the most commercial freelancers in the biz again, unquote. Yeah, I remember him saying this. He was trying to come up with something to energize the industry and honestly also help a lot of comic veterans who can't get work now because, I mean, I think there's a number of reasons. I think part of it is because they're expensive, and these comic companies, because their sales are so low, they just don't want to pay these guys what they want. But there's also the whole DEI angle of it, where most old veteran comic creators are white men, straight white men, and that is not what is in fashion in the comic book world these days, or in Hollywood or anywhere else, really. Well, those negotiations may have hit the skids. Mark Miller just tweeted, I'd been thinking about writing a Superman story late summer, but Superman goes public domain in 9 years, so I can write my story in 5 years' time. and pay the best artists in the industry to draw them, so it's all banked and ready for me to publish myself in 2033. Which is interesting because obviously the public domain, yes, Superman is going into public domain, but it's not the Superman we have now. It's the Superman that appeared, the version of Superman that appeared in Action Comics #1. And among other things, that Superman doesn't fly. He doesn't have X-ray vision, doesn't have heat vision, and you don't get anything else that related to Superman that doesn't appear in that comic. Like you get Lois, but there's no Jimmy, there's no Perry, there's no Daily Planet either, I don't think. I think it's called the Daily Star, maybe, in that one, if it's named at all. There's no Krypton. It's mentioned that he's from an alien world, but I don't think Krypton is actually mentioned by name, so you can't even say Krypton. And there's no Kryptonite, of course. And also there's none of his villains like Luthor or Brainiac or Toyman, Terraman, you name it. Parasite, Doomsday, Cyborg, Superman, etc. So if he's doing a story that's going to work in with under those restrictions, which is what he seems to be saying, it makes me wonder what was his story originally going to be before he started talking about doing it in public domain. And I would assume he'd have to change the story at least a little bit. Um, okay, so this is a topic Bleeding Cool touched on recently, which was followed up on a week or two later by Variety, Gizmodo, and more. In a decade, DC Comics will lose the copyright on those first issues of Action Comics, which established so much about the character. So, yes, Mark Millar could absolutely publish Superman comics, though it would have to be under a different name, as DC Warner Brothers still owns the trademark. Okay, I didn't realize that you couldn't publish it as Superman. But two things worth noting. Everyone will be allowed to do Superman comics, games, TV shows, and movies then. So Miller won't be just competing with DC, but with Marvel, Valiant, Todd McFarlane, Robert Kirkman, Viz Media, Webtoons, everyone doing Superman suddenly. What is the betting that Scholastic will have a Dogman versus Superman comic? And secondly, is this Mark negotiating with DC and Warner's in public? Did they say no? Has he hit an impasse and hoping that media reaction to this tweet will embarrass DC to agree with what he wants financially? Is pointing out that you are happy to wait for public domain enough to make DC decide they might as well go get some cash out of this than none? Will it work? Maybe. It is also probably worth noting that previous PR stunts from Mark Millar have included a faked kick-ass street video, a faked Obama reading Superior photos, as well as the fiction that Eminem was a star in a movie version of Wanted. The tame journalist he used to get that story momentum, his seemingly non existent trip to Detroit for MPH, whatever that is, his faked Times Square photos for Nemesis, his faked Starlight tattooed granny videos, or the way he got Reed Pop to buy 100,000 copies of the launch issue of the Magic Order at a heavy discount, before later destroying them so that he could claim it was the biggest selling creator owned launch in decades. So, public domain Superman, sure, with Batman the year afterwards. But what is he really after? To be fair, I did love his Superman Adventures comic back in the day. Did he write Superman Adventures? Oh, he did, didn't he? I didn't even realize that. He wrote the comic version of the Superman cartoon. I didn't even realize he had done that. Wow, that's cool. I never would have guessed. Because as I've said before, I have mixed feelings about Miller's work. Some of his stuff I've really liked, and some of it I have absolutely hated, Civil War being at the top of the list. But I don't know, who knows? Maybe if he wrote Superman Adventures, then it would seem to me he could certainly probably write a good Superman. Would he though? All right. All right, I'll do one more story here and then I'll wrap this up. And again, this is from Wizards of the Coast. I'm sorry, not Wizards of the Coast. This is from Bounding into Comics. It's about Wizards of the Coast. Okay, so Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro Digital Gaming president resigns after numerous Magic the Gathering and Dungeons and Dragons controversies. In a sudden staffing shakeup that will come as little surprise to Magic the Gathering and Dungeons and Dragons players, after a brief controversy-filled tenure just 2 years, Wizards of the Coast and Digital Gaming president Cynthia Williams has announced her resignation from the popular game publisher. Williams's exit was first disclosed on April 17th via an official corporate filing made by Hasbro with the United States Exchange and Securities Commission. Therein, the company announced on April 15, 2024, Cynthia Williams, president of Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro Gaming, informed the company of her resignation from the company effective April 26, 2024. The company is conducting a process to identify her successor, looking at both internal and external candidates. And here they have this big picture image. They've done, I guess, Lord of the Rings Magic the Gathering cards. And in these, they race swapped some of the characters. This is supposed to be Aragorn here. As noted above, though, sudden Williams's exit is far from unsurprising. Appointed to her now former role in February 2020, after her predecessor Chris Cox was promoted to his current position as Hasbro CEO, Williams's time with the company saw the main division under her control, Wizards of the Coast, marred by near endless controversy. In regards to the publisher's popular Magic the Gathering card game, under her leadership, the brand suffered such reputational disasters as the release of a set featuring race swapped versions of classic Lord of the Rings characters, a player being threatened with jail time after being accidentally but legally sold a then upcoming booster box ahead of its street date, and the introduction of a product release schedule so constant, nearly one set every month, that players have found themselves avoiding buying any new card sets whatsoever out of fear they could be rendered worthless near immediately after purchase. Meanwhile, Wizards of the Coast's other big name title, Dungeons and Dragons, saw those in charge of its production decry white male players simply for existing, attempting to introduce a highly predatory open game license and make several sensitivity and diversity related changes to its core identity, such as the removal of the terms race and half species from the game's lexicon. Further, and perhaps providing some insight as to why the publisher stumbled so much during her time in charge, as revealed by Williams herself in a 2020 interview with GeekWire's Thomas Wild, rather than ensuring their products remained accessible, affordable, and compelling, her main leadership focus for Wizards of the Coast was instead the continued promotion of diversity across both Magic the Gathering and Dungeons and Dragons. Since I got here, it has been very much about inviting more people to the party and making sure they found a space where they could express who they are, she told Wild. Our games teach that diversity is a strength. D&D in particular will teach you that together you can overcome tasks, challenges, or an adventure that you wouldn't have been able to on your own. When you're playing Magic, you're seeing the diversity of the world and the characters, she added. You see yourself. I love the stories of people playing Dungeons and Dragons and being able to express who they are in that game, which leads to being able to express who they are in their real life. We're very much cultivating that level of diversity as we're inviting players in. You see, I mean, the thing to me, when I was playing, I mean, at least certainly as a kid, is that the whole thing is that you would become somebody else. You wouldn't be you. You'd be this other character that was like more heroic and more capable than you were. But that was a different time. So yeah, like they go over here. There's been a lot of controversies under her tenure. They mention, yeah, the race swapping, the whole thing with the player being threatened with jail time. So there was a guy who was accidentally sold a box of cards, a booster box of cards that weren't supposed to be available yet, and he got them accidentally or something. But he didn't steal them; they were sold to him. But then when they found out, they hired Pinkerton detectives who basically went to this house and threatened the guy if he didn't hand them over. That didn't go over well. And then, as they mentioned, the predatory open gaming license. Um, so for many years, they've had an open gaming license where you could make material that was compatible with D&D for free, and you could basically make all the money. And then plans leaked out. I think this is late 2022 when plans leaked out that they were planning to alter the open gaming license so that they would not only be getting more money from the people, but in effect, anything that you made that was compatible with D&D, they would now own. In effect, they would now own whatever you created. And there was a big pushback against that. That was not popular at all. And that, I think, has led to quite a few people leaving D&D and moving over to more other OSR and other alternatives. And then, yeah, they've repeatedly in the last few years, people at TSR have lamented how unfortunate it is that D&D was largely the early days of D&D largely were D&D fans were largely white males. Of course, white males created D&D and the role-playing game hobby and pretty much populated it pretty heavily for decades. Um, but again, I mean, they have no problem now bashing those same people. And there were other things. One thing I remember that sticks out in my mind was, again, related to that open gaming license business, that there was some, I guess, some minutes that were leaked from a meeting where she talked about D&D and its future, and talked about how the future of D&D was going to be digital, I think, and that they were going to move increasingly make it a digital online experience, which they are in the process of doing with this D&D Beyond, or whatever it's called, this online D&D version. But I remember the key quote was, she had this quote where she said, "We consider D&D to be an IP that is under monetized," I believe was how she put it. And that TSR, or I keep saying TSR, that Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast's main, their main goal or main intention basically was to get more money from their customers, find more and new ways to get money from their customers. Not necessarily improve the experience, not necessarily do things they would like or give them better products, just get more money out of them. And again, D&D, making D&D an online subscription service is certainly part of that, because you'll be paying out of pocket every month to play D&D, and they're going to slam you with all kinds of microtransactions. As I've said before, and other people have described it, it's going to be microtransaction heaven. And it seems to be working, because let me change here, because yes, while I think D&D, sales of D&D books are down. Is that, do I have that? Okay. I don't think I have a copy of it, but there was a report that came out recently that sales of D&D books are actually down about 30% this year. And there are, I think, a number of reasons for that. Part of it is because, again, I do think there are people who have left D&D who have been so put off by some of the crap they've pulled over the last couple of years. But that's not all of it. I think a lot more of it is simply because the economy, when the economy hurts, it seems to really hit role-playing games hard. That happened back in the recession of the late 80s, early 90s. The role-playing game hobby, and TSR in particular, was hit really hard by that, and it's part of what led to TSR's bankruptcy. And another thing, like, what was I going to say? Yeah, and another thing is that they've already announced that there's going to be a new edition of D&D. There are new books coming, and when it's announced that there's a new edition coming, inevitably the current edition, the sales are going to drop, because people are thinking, well, why buy it? Because there's going to be a new one in another year or so anyway. And as far as her leaving, again, the article kind of paints the picture that she left because of maybe all the controversies, and that maybe it was seen as not a good idea to keep her around. I don't know. because while book sales are down, overall D&D has actually made money. Now it's down somewhat from over the last couple of years, but that's because during the pandemic and during the lockdowns, D&D soared in popularity actually because people were stuck at home and had nothing to do. And since the pandemic ended and things have opened up, sales on D&D have gone down. But again, it's down from an all-time high, so they're still pretty high and it's still profitable. So it's not as if her tenure has been a failure, at least not financially. Now, will it be over the long term? Some of the stuff she's done, maybe that's possible. Certainly, I suspect simply that between the bad economy and again some of the publicity black eyes and stuff like that, that they can look out ahead and see that maybe sales of D&D are maybe going to continue to go down, possibly. I don't know. And maybe decided that it was just a good time to get out while she was ahead, so to speak. But I don't think it's a case of like she was run out because her tenure's been such a failure or something, because in terms of making money, it hasn't been. Okay, I guess that's going to wrap it up for me, right about at an hour here. So I will thank those who tuned in during the live stream and those who will tune in on the rewatch. Again, please like the stream and please do sub to the channel and check out some of my other videos while you're here, and have a good weekend. I should be back next weekend, I believe, and probably also will stream Tuesday night, doing my Tuesday night Trek Talk stream, where I'll be taking a look at The Naked Time, I believe. Until then, have a good evening.